Good evening. Good evening. This is Renee Manford with What's Your Passion podcast. Another episode. I think where are we at, Doc? We're about 6 episodes in, I believe, right now. And I have a very good friend of mine, Mike Mito. Mike Mito has been in the commercial real estate space in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I think he deals with other states also across in different areas. And Mike and I have been friends or becoming friends over the last 3 years almost, I think. Right, Mike?
Yeah, it's been a while now.
Yeah,
we've sort of been like
started.
traveling in nearby orbits.
It's like anything in this space, we have friends that we've come across that we know each other, and as we get to know each other and talk to each other more, we find out we have more different friends in different spaces. Right. So it's been very interesting just learning more about your history and some of the things you've done. So I appreciate you coming on tonight. And really what this podcast is all about, everyone, is really just information. I invite different guests on, and I think it's going to bring value to you in all different areas, whether it's business, life, real estate, business and mergers and acquisitions, different subjects that I like to really talk about is really just areas that can improve people's lives in different areas. So tonight I wanted to get Mike on and just talk about different things that's going on in the real estate world. Some different areas that we've been talking about with some different things we're seeing in the commercial spaces, and maybe just kind of go off on some areas that we've been talking about also in even other states. We're based here in Louisiana, but we're seeing some opportunities of popping up all over in different states. So Mike, if you don't mind, so share with me, just kind of starting off with, so where are you from exactly originally, and how long you've been in New Orleans, or are you born and raised here?
No, I'm not born and raised here. I've been in New Orleans. It's going on 24 years, 25 years. So it's been a while. I moved here from the West Coast, but grew up originally in sort of the ancestral home of the Cajuns up in Nova Scotia. So not in Indiana or out there, but in Halifax, the big city as it's known. But,
So you've been there, so 25 years, so you've been there for a long time.
It feels like multiple lifetimes. There's a lot that's going on in a span of time.
What moved you here? Like what made the transition to this area?
That's a good question. So at the time I was sort of living in a little town in the West Coast, and it was pretty comfortable, and I was like, I feel like I need to maybe challenge myself or just mess things up. And if I'm gonna do that, I'll do it when I'm young. I didn't want to necessarily be, all that comfortable, I guess, at 27 when I was. And so I was like, well, let me go to a city and see what happens there. And so I looked at probably 4 or 5 different places where I knew somebody early on. And so I had worked with a guy that was from here originally, and he did exotic skins trade. So I worked for an alligator farming, and they ended up buying a crawfish processing plant. So I was integrating the crawfish processing plant into the larger corporate structure. But it sounds a lot more interesting than it was, basically. I sat in a warehouse by the airport and looked at profit and loss statements, and every once in a while, like once a week, I was driving out to Catahoula and getting in traffic around Baton Rouge. So that was it. And I did that for about 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And then on to do other things.
So so after you went into, so you're working in that processing plant, I guess, overviewing the books and everything else at that time?
Yeah. So like they had bought this crawfish processing facility out in Catahoula, and the idea was that they were going to be able to process the alligator there.
I got you.
In that online, and to be more vertically integrated as far as the company goes. And so I was basically getting them up so that their corporate reporting was in line with what the company expected, which took a little bit because it had been like a family run company for however many generations. And so, if they needed money, they would just take it out of petty cash, and there wasn't necessarily the proper reconciliation of those things. And
so how old are you? How old were you back when you started that?
27, 28, I think.
So what's your background to get into the financials? You were in financials before that, like working with companies, or
No, Actually, I wasn't. I just like I have a knack for numbers and I get them. What I was doing before that was I was waiting tables and cooking in a Japanese restaurant, and I was working with at-risk youth in foster homes
Really?
program. Hmm.
That's interesting. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
where you kind of started learning financials and doing things in that time.
That was definitely sort of the first time like looking at things like profit and loss statements, and I remember the owner at the time just basically being, he's like, you like numbers? I'm like, yeah. It's like, well, these tell a story, and at some point, like once you start looking at them month after month and year over year, you can look at certain things and you can get an idea for how things are running just based on the way that the numbers are trending, and you can see if there are issues here and there. If you know the business well enough and what your expectations are for how everything, like what the cost of this is and that, and if something is out of line, then you know that there's an issue. And I was like, sounds interesting. So that was
Hmm.
more or less what I was doing.
I've got a
Yeah.
question for you.
Sure.
What was your go to your specialty your best dish in the Japanese restaurant?
My best dish in the Japanese restaurant.
Yeah, what's your go to?
I mean, I liked making the sushi, but they wouldn't let me play with that too much because that was, more high dollar kind of stuff. I got pretty
Sure.
good at making like yakisoba and like fresh vegetables and all that. But honestly, the thing I really used to like doing is that we would just have, it's simple, but we just have a box basically of soft shell crabs. And so just like fry up one of those for a snack.
Nice,
That was
nice.
good.
Because
Yeah.
I'm a fat kid, I like to eat. That's why I ask.
I hear you. I mean, a lot of it was good. I learned that cooking in a restaurant can take the joy out of cooking for you.
For sure. All right, I'm done hijacking the show.
That's
No
good.
worries.
So so how long were you doing that company or that business?
It was like 6 or 8 months or something like that.
And then what did you go into next?
I sort of just I went back to waiting tables for a while, which was pretty miserable. Um, at a couple places like in the French Quarter, and then through the process of doing that, like ran into somebody randomly one day who was doing production work in town, and
Uh-huh.
I'd been here a while and didn't really know any of that stuff that was going on. So I got introduced to the convention center and the trade shows and the convention business, and I spent a lot of years playing music and hooking up sound systems. My good friend, was studying film while we were living together out on the West Coast. So I'd done a lot of camera work, and I'd prior to that done a lot of photography. So apparently these were all skills that were pretty easily translatable to this convention and trade show business. So I got into that, and within a pretty quick, couple of years time, it sort of established myself as, being somebody that would show up for work when I was supposed to show up for, which in New Orleans, certain times of year, like causes you to just rise to the top just by showing up when you're supposed to be there.
Right.
And ended up doing that for about 15 years and did, many different things and worked in most of the convention center and most of the large properties in town, as well as on the riverboats and like Superdome, and then also traveled around and did shows, like did Microsoft's global sales show for about 11 years as a zone lead, and met some other folks and worked a couple Olympics, not necessarily in that
Hmm.
same kind of thing, but managing crews. So I worked at Salt Lake City in 2002 and managed the snow base and ski venue, all access control points and that, and then did the same thing in 2010 in Vancouver. So, and in
Wow.
between of, a bunch of other gigs, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, Diabetes Association. A lot of it was most of, probably over half of what I did was for large medical things and like pharmaceutical companies, basically.
So you had that diverse time here where you just went through a lot of different things and learned a lot of skills and trying to figure out what you wanted to do when you grow up. It's kind of like myself, just going through different phases, learning.
Yeah, so like the convention and trade show business was good for in a lot of ways because it's it's not necessarily like on call, but it's not a set schedule. So you get called up to do work, and you go and you work, and then when you're done with work, you're done. And so I got paid pretty well, and by the end of it, I was making a nice day rate and those kinds of things, and it gave you the opportunity to learn some about different businesses, or go to different places. And then the folks that I was sort of working with became a lot of those people were sort of people that were creative or in a creative mindset, that this was a way that they could get their bills paid. But there were a lot of musicians and filmmakers and writers and whatever it might be that were just sort of doing this. And so it was an interesting crowd of folks to work with, and I enjoyed it for a decent amount of time that I did it. But I also saw, like, the two main things that got me out of it was basically you would go in, and you would sometimes, for some of the companies, like, we would go in and we'd build a booth for whoever, GlaxoSmithKline or some other large pharmaceutical corporation. And you'd go in and you'd spend, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks sometimes, building this massive booth that they would spend millions of dollars on. They'd have a show. The show would run for like 3 days, and then you'd tear the whole thing down again afterwards. And I was like, okay, what could I actually build if, like, the energy that I put into things was building something that is not going to get torn down?
Right.
And then the other side of that was, after having kids and just being like, when you did that stuff, if they said you were there from 6 a.m. till 6 o'clock at night, that was just dependent on how it actually rolled out that day. If trucks were late or if things didn't get set up, you're just there till the job is over. So it might be 6 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night. And it was basically like, when I was working, whether or not there was anything really worth my time to do, they had bought my time, so I still had to stay there. And so I remember a gig where basically they were doing a breakfast session and a dinner session, and we were doing camera for me and this other guy, and he's still doing camera. Like, I see him out at the Pelicans games. He does usually, I think, like the away feed. He sits underneath the basket and does that. But we were both there as camera guys, and was literally, we came in for like 6 to do the 6:30 breakfast thing, which was over at like 7:30, and then we were there until the dinner one at 6 o'clock. And some people were like, "Hey, this is great. I'm getting paid to do nothing." And I was like, "Wow, this is I got a 6-month-old kid, and I'm pretty sure something's going on with them today." So that was kind of
interesting. So you got, I can see, I can see that, because I remember I did scaffolding. I was in an oil refinery, and I remember I was getting paid well, but the same thing. We were building these things up. We would lay around for a while, and I was always dreaming. I was always thinking that it's got to be something else, right? Yeah, I think we all got it. When you're a creative mind, and you're always thinking that there's more. So you're getting paid good, but then so you met a lot of good people through that process. You learned a lot of incredible skills, being creative like that. So through that process, you kind of just started figuring out with the kids and figuring out another aspect.
I'm sorry, what was that?
See, is there some music in the background or something?
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I'm not sure where it's coming from.
I don't know.
That is bizarre.
I got my headphones in. I don't hear anything in there. I don't know if it's coming from outside.
It could be, maybe. Hopefully, the only reason I brought that up was because sometimes YouTube gets very, very picky, and they'll either copyright strike us or remove the video.
Hello, guardians of the group.
Gotcha.
Hello.
That might be one. So, okay. I think I got it sorted.
Jackpot.
All right. I'm sorry, Renee. What was the last question?
Y'all figured it out?
We did.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Mike did. I'll take credit.
So,
I appreciate the heads up.
So where you are now with the real estate over the last few years, I guess you fell. How did you get into real estate, or did that just fall into, you met somebody in New Orleans that just kind of got you interested, or?
No, I was always like, honestly, since I went to college or whatever it was, I was just interested in real estate.
Right.
I went to school out in California, and I was like, I wanted to try to get something there when I was out there, which was, that probably would have ended up being well. I went to college in Santa Cruz. And so my understanding is Santa Cruz County now is one of the most expensive counties in the country. At the time that I was school there in like 1989. They were just recovering from earthquake. So they had an earthquake in 89. I went there in 90, sorry. And so all the downtown was like in tents and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know,
Wow.
there's questions. It seems to be a common trend for me, though, just living in places that are recovering from disaster or facing disaster. But so yeah, so by the time that I finished there, was honestly, they had the main street through going through town was like Pacific Avenue. And they basically had those like semi-permanent tent type structures. So where they have the metal frames and all that, and all the little restaurants and shops, a lot of that were in those buildings, and
Right.
Pacific Avenue fenced off. And then by the end of it, that was all open up again. And so I really didn't see any of that until my last year there, as far as that. And it's like, it looked completely different. I'm sure it looked like what it looked like before.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, even then I was looking at property, and, you know, nobody else was interested. And then after there, I moved to Bellingham, Washington. And then while I was there, along with working in the restaurant and working with Catholic Charities with at-risk youth and whatever it was, both of my landlords, a guy named Dave, and I think the other guy's name was Jeff, were both like young guys that were, you know, probably around my age at the time, like in their late
Right.
20s, maybe a little older than me. But they had both invested in real estate. So the house that I was in, you know, found out the situation, like how he bought it. And he wasn't actively doing so much stuff. The first guy, Dave, the house that we were living in, he had bought that place for maybe 10 grand or whatever it was. You know, it's a nice old house
Jeez.
by the university there. Yeah, but the other guy was like actively buying things. He was buying things out of foreclosure. And so I
Yeah.
started working, just learning the process. You know, he gave me the tapes that he had for all the different things that he had sort of studied on that, on the
Right.
buying houses process. And so I worked with him, like painting houses and ripping tile off the floor and redoing things, and just sort of learned a lot in that, and was basically doing that to both learn how to do it as well as supplement the cost of my rent, the houses that I was, you know, renting from these folks. So that was probably but I didn't, you know, I couldn't get it together at that time to buy anything.
Right.
And so I didn't end up buying anything out there. And then when I moved to New Orleans, it was kind of the first thing after I moved out of my first apartment, which was down in the French Quarter. I was there for about until 2002 when I went to go work out in Salt Lake City. And after I came back from there, I really like more actively started pursuing and trying to find how to get involved in real estate. So I met with somebody, and they basically looked at my finances, which were, you know, not much at the time. Honestly, I
Mhm.
was still just hobbling along.
That
And
was what, 2000? What year is this? 2000.
so that's probably like, you know, so I did the Olympics in 2002, but I probably first met with her like in 2000, you know,
Okay.
and
Yeah, that's
she,
the same. That's about the same time. I started in 2000, right, with real
yeah,
estate. I was doing insurance, and same thing. I ran into a friend, and we did a deal together right around 2000, and that's when I first started. So it's interesting. We started right at the same time with it.
yeah. So that time I met with her, and she looked at what, you know, what I was working on, and pretty much laid out a plan, like a 3-year plan to try to afford, you know, a mortgage, more or less. And she's like, you have to just work as much as you can and not write off anything. And so I just
Hmm.
started doing that. And I want to say it took, you know, pretty much the 3 years to have basically show that I made a little bit more this year than I did the last year. And, you know, and worked at that, and then started looking at properties, you know, and at that time it was before the whole hospital project was up. So like looking over in that neighborhood, like along Canal Street, where between Canal and Tulane and over there where the
Okay.
big
Yeah.
hospital,
Yeah.
you know, so looking at different properties and then going through the process, it was by the time that I got a house, like I didn't even, you know, I'd already put in offers on 4 other ones and hadn't gotten any of them. And had been nervous before that. And by the time like I came around to this one, I was like, whatever, just put an offer in, figuring that it wasn't going to get accepted, just like all the other ones. Then I
Right.
was going to, you know, it's basically the same scenario where some property would be, seems to just follow everybody. I think that we're invest in real estate, where property has been sitting there for, you know, who knows how long, a year and a half. right? And
Uh-huh.
nothing's happened to it, and you go and see it, and you're like, oh wow, that's kind of cool. I'll take a run in it, and then you go and you write the offer, and they're like, oh, they just accepted something this morning. You're like, okay,
Right.
great. That happened time and time again, and so by the time they did accept the offer for the property, I was like, oh, well, great. What am I going to do now?
Hmm.
And
So was the realtor helpful? She walked you through and
yeah,
helped you.
actually, there was a guy, I think his name was Joe, maybe. That was my realtor at that point in time, and actually, both he and his wife were very helpful because it turned out that the lady who had been helping me out, he looked at what she had kind of laid out for me, and he was like, "How do you know this woman?" And I was like, "Well, the friend referred me to her, and so I've been just working with her, and she laid out this plan." And he was like, "She's not doing you any favors." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so he looked at basically this was the HUD, whatever,
Uh-huh.
the truth in lending sheet basically outlined like what it was. And so I was getting, the low down payment kind of thing, like first time home buyer or whatever it might have been, those kinds of things. But in the process, she was basically like, and this was, the mortgage at that time for the building I was going for, or like the building I was going for was only like a $70,000 property, right? But she had managed
Yeah.
to somehow pack like $12,000 worth of fees in for her, or somewhere
Whoa.
thereabouts, into this loan. Yeah. And, but I was only paying like putting like 5% down. But he's like, yeah, but look at this. There's like 10 grand that's going here for this and that. And I was like,
Wow.
you're right. So he was like, I don't think she's doing. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to work with you. And she was not happy about that. She's like, I put all this time in. And I'm like, yeah, but you basically, this is not helping me at all because this money that's coming out of my pocket, but it's not going into the loan or like buying down the equity in the property. So it's just money that's, I'm essentially throwing away.
Right.
So his wife worked at SunTrust or something, some mortgage company that's no longer in existence anyhow. That was the casualty of some of the different economic things that went down.
Right.
They
Wait,
were,
what was Joe's last name?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Not Joe. Okay.
I've
Okay.
been trying to figure it out to see if he's still around. It's just been, quite some time. And
Did he drive a Porsche?
no, not at that time.
Okay. No. Who knows?
Yeah, it is, like I said, and then his wife was working for this mortgage company, and she's like, we can get it done. And so they got it done. And then we also basically did so where the price I'd agreed to on the property was like $70,000, but it needed
Right.
work on. So at that point in time, it was a lot easier to adjust things some. So I got the loan for $110,000. I had to put $10,000 down at closing, and then they cut me a check to basically do the renovations on the property.
Correct. Yeah. That
And
back then it was sweet. People just messed
yeah,
up the whole system. So it was
yeah,
a good time between 2000 and 2007, and then
right,
2008 totally messed up everything.
right.
I
So
think it changed a little bit after Hurricane Katrina, but it really didn't start affecting until around 2007, 2008 is where the banks really just stopped doing that because of
oh
the
yeah,
mortgage.
regulations changed completely, right? So they
Yeah,
had like
so,
the no doc loans and all that kind of stuff. And you could also, like I
yeah,
said, we just
that was a good time. That was a good role.
yeah. So I got in at that point in time, and then so that was like 2003 that I bought that property, and then I spent like a year and a half of my life putting this thing together, figuring out what I could figure out, evicting tenants, and trying to get it up and running. And then, like July of 2005, I put an AC unit in it for the first time. And then, like August of 2005, I was back out of it again for however many years. Still,
Did you?
actually, haven't moved back into it. Like I stayed there off and on when it was still busted up on like an air mattress and all that other kind of stuff. But yeah.
Okay. So they didn't give so they you didn't so you had some renovations to do to the property, but they didn't work the loans where they got you enough money to do the renovations.
I got enough to stabilize the property, but like, you know, I had $30,000, like $29,000, whatever. And this
Right.
it is, you know, probably from the 1880s, a Victorian townhouse, and it's like 2,600 square feet. And at
Oh,
that time,
geez.
slate roof on it, so
Correct.
$30,000 wasn't going to get far. It was mostly to get the trash out of it, redo some floors, and repaint it. And yeah, I didn't honestly like the pipes were all external and everything had been done and run on the outside of it, and it wasn't damaged enough to justify me like going into the walls or anything like that. So
Right.
those things that was after Katrina when the property was significantly more damaged. At that point, I decided just okay, let's do it right or try to do it right. I guess.
In fact, fast forward a little bit, you kind of just started. So you did a couple more properties after that, or you just, or what happened with that property?
So I still have that property, and then after Katrina happened, I bought another property. I I'm not sure which the funds they were that I used
Right.
for that. If it was part of the insurance funds that I had gotten or something. But I bought another property up the street from that one, basically on the corner of Dorgenois and La Harpe. And I'd come across Dorgenois just one day driving around. I was like, wow, it's a really beautiful street and has oak trees all along it, different architectural styles.
Right.
And so I went and saw a house with my friend at the time. It was a real estate agent. I mean, she's still a real estate agent. So she showed me this property. And so I basically brought a couple other people into it, and then three of us, and we bought that property and rehabbed it. And then they didn't really get along. So eventually I ended up buying them both out and taking over the property and I
People
lived
just,
in.
I don't know what it is about people. Why they just can't get along. I've had that same thing. It's just certain relationships you just can't do business with them, and I don't know why. But sometimes
Yeah,
you get
it's
things back.
things kind of like they started out well, and we'd sort of had a division. I think a part of the problem was we sort of had this division of labor that went out, and
Right.
it creates these false pre in some way that we weren't all engaged in it to the same level. So most of what I was doing was on the front end. So I identified property and I laid out a scope of work and I made an estimated budget for what it was going to
Right.
cost, all these kinds of things. And I sort of prepped all of that. And then one of the other people was handling actually getting the loan and doing all those things. And so they were handling kind of the underwriting and making the relationships. And then one of them was the one that was there, like running the job more on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha.
And so we were like, okay, you did all this stuff, so you can have the biggest bedroom, and like I get
Uh,
it, separated. But then she just kind of continued to feel like it was more her house than anybody
right.
else, right? So it just kind of worked out that way. And then I was like, that's cool. I'm gonna just step out and go live somewhere else. So I rented a place around the corner for like a couple of years, and by the end of that, they couldn't deal with each other. And the
So
one
at
that was
this
still
time, you weren't a
living,
realtor yet, right? You were just doing it. You were
no,
just
I was just investing, right? And the one that
investing.
was there that kind of like wanted control of everything couldn't afford to make the payments on her own. And we're like, well,
Correct.
we're staying there, so it's on you. And so then that eventually just came to a head. So one partner bought the other partner out, and then I bought her both shares out, basically. And then I
Gotcha.
had that until 2019, and I sold that one and did a 1031 exchange to buy a place out in Orange Beach. So
And so I see you have Orange Beach, and I think don't you have one in Los Angeles or something? Or
no,
I know it's something I thought you had another family property or something you're dealing with somewhere. But so the Orange Beach, how do you laugh? No, you and I had some conversations, and my sister-in-law has a condo there, and I'm talking to a lot of individuals right now about Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And I think you and
yeah,
I had a conversation that what we're seeing is the excitement of those areas. But how do you like the Orange Beach? I think y'all do you rent that one, vacation rental it?
Yeah, so it's like, I've stopped kind of renting it over the winter months. I did it
Okay,
for a couple of years because with the 1031 exchange, it was just necessary that I had to pretty much have it up for lease as much as possible.
right,
Of the You can use it 10% of the days that it's listed or whatever it was. So if you listed it every day, maybe you get 30 days of use out of it. If you don't, you're sort of locked into 14 days for the first 24 months. So I did that, but then I found out like it just honestly wasn't worth it. Like the rates over there over the wintertime are, I think they were renting out the apartment for like $2,200 a month. It might be a little higher now, but at the time it was like $2,200 a month.
right,
And my cost of operations for it was like $1,600 a month, just between like the homeowners and the insurance and the water bill, the taxes, and all that other kind of stuff. My estimate was about $1,600 a month. So I'd
gotcha,
make like $100 on it, but not per month, but not be able to use it at all. And then I also found out that these like snowbirds, as a term, they're there long enough to be aggravated by things in the apartment. It's like somebody comes in and they're coming in for a weekend, like they're not looking at stuff, whatever it might be, whether or not there's dirt around the sliding doors or something like that. The people that are there for that long amount of time, they start being like, asking me if I was going to change the bed or when I was going to upgrade this or upgrade that. And I'm like, well, it doesn't make, I could buy a new bed, but what it costs for a bed is more than what I'm getting paid for the month for rent. So like, why would I do that? And then why would I buy a new bed and let some random people be the first person to use it? Like, none of that makes any sense to me. So,
right,
but then compared to the summertime, which the folks out there term like the 100 days of hell between Memorial Day and Labor Day,
right,
you
right,
know, they charge, I don't know, anywhere from like 400 to probably like 600 a night for it.
correct.
Uh, so I just like been just renting it out during the summertime pretty
Yeah,
dedicatedly. But like this last summer, from an anecdotal perspective, was less, probably 75%, 80% of what the prior year had been, which was like booked solid, solid. So
wow. Did you have you seen a big change? I think you and I talked about it. You saw a big change this past year with rentals,
it seemed like it, yeah, compared to what I'd seen, like honestly, the prior couple
right?
years, and mostly in August. So June and July were both strong, but like 2 years ago, July, the entire month was booked solid. June was booked solid, except for like 3 or 4 days. And the same thing with August. And then this
Right.
last June was maybe 70%. July was still strong, but then August was, a week or something like that.
Now you specialize in commercial real estate. I know you're on a board of several different associations. You're the director of commercial sales with is it JPAR Golf South?
Yeah, J Power Golf South.
And I know you're on the New Orleans board. And so you've been part of the commercial division, I think, for the last is it 10 years or at least 5
Yeah,
years?
about 10 years.
So what are you seeing like with just the industry right now in commercial? What are you seeing right now going on with New Orleans in general, but maybe across the different states? You've seen some things occurring over the next few months, or I know we talked about office
Yeah.
spaces, obviously, and
I think office space is going to continue to have its challenges, right? It's interesting though. Like I just saw an article today, which works out well for the folks that just bought the DXC building, because I think that was sold not too long ago. But there was a story that said that the New Orleans police are going to have their offices there because the building
no,
that they're bought needs all these renovations and everything like that. So that's good because, from my understanding, when that building sold, it was about 50% occupied or somewhere thereabouts.
right,
The thing, like I did like an analysis of the office market not too long ago for New Orleans, and the interesting thing is that we've sort of found stability in our mediocrity. We didn't have a blazing office market or anything like that. We've kind of just been more or less the same since the 80s. Not any new office space has come online.
Hmm.
So they say our traditional kind of vacancy rate was like 18%, and during the height of the pandemic, we were at like 21%. I've heard though from folks in the office market though that that doesn't necessarily reveal the true number of things, because some of that occupancy might actually be aging leases. So the lease is there and it's in place and it's classified as being occupied, but the tenants themselves are not actually using that space to the extent that they were. And at whichever point their lease is going to come due, that those things could be changing significantly. But yeah, I think the bigger thing for New Orleans and Louisiana are just kind of all these other things, like a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of stuff. Like the interest rates don't help us, but we have probably our biggest challenge with the insurance situation, right? And then beyond the insurance situation, actually be doing things in Orleans itself is kind of the frustration that people seem to express with trying to get things done in the city.
Right.
And I've talked to folks that kind of cut their teeth here, but they've gone to other markets and they've done projects in other markets, and they see what it can be like when you actually have the support of the city government and people that are willing to help you get things done versus feeling like you're being stonewalled.
Right.
They're less inclined to do it. So the unfortunate thing really for me is it's hard for me to sell New Orleans as a market, right? Honestly, for anybody that's looking for a stable, long-term commercial investment, because I can't quantify the running cost for anything right now. Like the stuff is changing all the time. Property taxes just went up. My property taxes just went up,
Right.
and my insurance doubled. And I don't know that I see relief or any kind of actual handling of those things on the near term. So
So I had really this past, since you and I met a couple of weeks ago for lunch. That was a great lunch, actually. We need to go back to that location.
That'd be great.
Um, and I've partnered up with a company who does capital loans, and they basically are helping banks actually in areas that the banks are not lending certain type of loans, certain type of loans. So this company has a partnership, not just partnerships, relationships with capital families, families who have big money in New York and different areas.
Sure.
And he mainly specializes in businesses. So we started really talking over the last few weeks, and today we had a long 2-hour conversation on just different businesses. And when you look at real estate compared to a business, and when I first started, it was just like yourself in the early 2000s, that real estate was what I knew, buying properties, and you get into the point where you have these properties, but then you start seeing after a period of time is like how much you're really averaging on that property. And so I'm finding now is the more conversations and more individuals I'm watching there, everybody's really looking at the business model. They're buying businesses versus real estate. Now, real estate sometimes comes with businesses, but it's just the upside opportunities. You have so much more of an upside opportunity if you can grab onto, especially right now, a lot of the baby boomers are retiring, individuals who are, there's more businesses for sale than ever before, and some of these individuals don't know really what to do. They don't know, their kids don't want to take over the business, things of that nature.
Right.
So we've been talking a lot about that. And again, on Louisiana, it's like, do you want to buy a business in Louisiana, or do I want to buy a business in, I'm looking at Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, because of the insurance, because of the taxes, because of different factors, So it's just really interesting times right now. We're going through trying to figure out what is it that if you're going to invest, and I think my banker told me today is, the numbers are just not matching up anymore. It's just crazy.
I mean, that's one of the, like, I was looking at things, and I think we're still in a market right now where buyers and sellers aren't really agreeing on the price, right? So the buyers still kind of have the hangover from 2020, 2021 when everything was selling,
Right.
and you had multiple offers and all these kinds of things. And any property was a good property almost. You just wanted to buy into the market, to now where things have gotten consistently more challenging. I think there's a lot of uncertainty overall in the marketplace. And so if I'm a buyer, I'm buying for value. And if I'm going to put money at risk, I need to know that my chances of maintaining that value or increasing it have to be pretty strong. Like, I'm not willing to necessarily take a risk at a property. I
Right,
need
right.
to know that the income profile, like all those other things, make sense, and that I've figured out what my costs are going to be, and not do anything from that emotional basis, and just have it be purely like, okay, does this make sense? This is what I can rent it for. Because the other thing is that also on the other side of that, if you're looking at some of these properties, like, I feel we sort of pushed the boundaries for rents. Like, rents increased significantly, sort of along with the prices of houses. But
Right.
now, into this environment with the cost of inflation and the cost of everything, I don't think you can continue to push those rents. I think at some point you start to have people falling off, you
Correct.
know. So you have to kind of look at it, say, and if we're going to continue to be in sort of this environment for the next little while, then your hopes of increasing the rent down the line are also somewhat constrained. Whereas if you were looking at that same thing a couple of years ago, you might think like, oh, like year after year, I can push my rent 5 or 7%, and it's
Mhm.
not. Now you're like, we're lucky if we get this. We're probably going to have to stay here for a
Correct.
little, and it's better to have the good tenant that's going to stay in place than it is to get a higher rate for somebody that might not, who knows? Like, they might not have a job in a year, or their cost of living might change, so it doesn't work out for them.
No, I think I can't. I mean, I think back on the rents back in, just 10 years ago. You can have a
Yeah,
nice, at least 2 bedroom, 800 a month. I think now they're going for like 15, 1600 a month, 18, 2000 a month.
yeah.
I have
I'd
a
say
cousin
probably
that's
at 1,600 is, you know the lower end probably of a two
correct.
bedroom these days. It's like a 1 bedroom now. 1 bedrooms are probably like 1,200. You can still find places, but I feel like I've seen a little bit more pullback, and things are definitely sitting on the market longer. So then,
Mhm.
you have to start making that decision. Is it better to have less money today, or to hold out in hopes that I'm going to get this more down the line? And then,
So
you know,
what's some of your business plans for the next, which some of the things you're, I know we talked about vertical farming. I mean, that's still interesting. Just different businesses and models. And what are some of the things that's in your game plan right now that you're planning for the next few years? Is it buying more real estate in certain areas, or just kind of looking for
I mean,
different
I
business?
love real estate, and it's definitely helped me get to where I am now. Like, I'm basically, so my story, just kind of finish that off. Like, I bought that property back in 2003. I've fixed it up. It got half the roof got peeled back during Katrina, and I went through another like 4 years where it was redoing it, bad contractors, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And time I was like, oh, there has to be like some other way. So, I learned how to trade options and invest in stocks. I learned about precious metals and bullion. I worked with people like starting up companies. And after 10 years, I was like, no, man, like, real estate's a pain, but it really is the most salient of all the things that I looked at,
Right.
because like, everybody knows what it is, right? And
Hmm.
something that, that's traded on the stock market, whatever, a silicon chip or something like that. Maybe you know what it is, maybe you know it, but do you really understand the process, and what are the metrics geopolitically that affect that process? And, you
Right.
know, trade embargoes, this, that, the other thing, where are they being made, where they need to be made, like all kinds of different stuff comes into play. And the house is the house, right? So,
Correct.
it offers me shelter, it offers me like the basic human things, or the businesses, like where I go and I cut people's hair, or I make people food, like all these very salient human things. And so at the end of the day, I was like, this makes more sense.
Right.
And there is no easy way, right?
Hmm.
You're gonna get cuts and bruises and scars, basically. So, which is the thing that is gonna give you the most stable return and provide you some sense of stability? And for me, it's been real estate. So, I'll
Good.
always look at real estate. Right now, I'm not looking so much in Orleans, especially from an investment perspective, because of these other carrying costs. They just erode your margins.
Right, right.
So it's tough to look at. I might look at, areas outside because my kids are here and I have all those other kinds of considerations. But, like we're talking about, like I was just in Mississippi and was pretty impressed with what I'm seeing in Biloxi as far as like that stuff. Nothing happened for years and years and years. And it seems like now, like the last 3 or 4 years, like suddenly all these lots that were along the coast that were just sitting there, like they're now,
Mhm.
you go there and the casinos are fancier and there's a higher quality of just accommodations, and
Right, right,
it's going in a different direction from how we're going.
right,
Um,
right.
but the other side of that, though, is I can also say, like, if I look around New Orleans and if I look at some of the public facing things, they've done a really nice job. Like, if I was down by the convention center where I worked for years, and it used to be deadly walking out of the front of there because it was just like
Mhm.
4 lane, 50 miles an hour. So now we have this whole pedestrian walkway and the bike cabs and all that stuff, all the way down to the aquarium and all of that, where they tore down the old ferry terminal and the aquarium, like so by the aquarium and the Four Seasons, like that all looks great, all
Mhm.
along that. But then, like, it makes me think, so I could come to New Orleans, and which is probably part of the whole thing, but I could come to New Orleans for a convention, and I'm just sort of in this bubble of things that are nice and new and redone. So it's all like very outward, public facing, but
Right, right,
you get into the core of where people live, and the streets are a mess and the power isn't stable and there's flooding and all these other kinds of things. So, I don't know if that's a good way to spend your money or not. I guess it's just what it comes down to, right? Because I guess it continues to have people coming to town, so you're generating revenue from that. And since we're a service economy, you have people going to restaurants, you have them going to whatever, to Bourbon Street to drink and all of that. But the folks that actually live here, I have way more conversations with people talking about getting out than I
right,
do,
right,
like, you know. And you can go through parts of the year where you're like, it's great. You can have these sublime experiences. Like you'd have a wonderful Mardi Gras, or Jazz Fest could be epic, or Halloween or whatever it is. It goes, maybe I can stay in this relationship a little bit longer, you
right,
know. But like a lot of the folks, if they can get out, they're getting out, which is sad
right.
for a lot of reasons, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's a shame. I think we have such a beautiful city that it could be, but it's just the political parties have to get, have to make some changes, and hopefully insurance and things of that nature. But I don't see it. I don't see a lot of reverting. I don't see reverting backwards. I don't see too much going down. I don't see the insurance coming down too much. The interest rates, property values. It's kind of like once it comes, it might go down a little bit, but it's not going to come down a tremendous more.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the problem. If I'm being honest about it, then I see things getting worse before they get better.
Right, right,
I don't see how they get better right now because I don't see the political will to even deal with most of that stuff. And I don't know that, the people seem to be hung up on things that, in the grand scheme of things, are not that. They might make for interesting news stories, but they're not that
right,
relevant to the majority of the people's daily lives.
right,
So we're not like tackling those things. And like I said, we've done some nice capital projects, and we'll see how this whole what like riverfront district or whatever it is. But there's already like talk about kind of the dealings of some of these things, and it's sort of the case with all these things. Like whatever's a good idea, there's always some kind of other thing that's going on over here that either railroads it, makes it so it's not what was originally promised, or makes it so that it doesn't even happen at all for one reason or another. And so it's
right,
just time
right,
to be done with all of that stuff. And like this, by most metrics, for a city the size that it is, to be as well known internationally is pretty amazing. Like we punch way above our weight class, right? So we have a fascinating city, but we also have these long-standing structural things that, I don't know will ever get fixed,
Right.
which is unfortunate.
Hmm.
You see
What
things like the
if like what are some of the things you're like? Who to you are you dealing with clients currently, or or I know you're still involved with a lot of the organizations, and I know you're are you dealing with clients right now with certain
yeah.
coming into you, or what are some of your daily things going on right now?
Yeah, so I have like, clients that I'm working with that have different things like right now. Like I mentioned to you, I've been talking with somebody that's looking for assisted living facilities in Louisiana, like licensed facilities. They want to invest in that. I'm just, as of a couple days ago, like working as the leasing agent for the Healing Center, along with somebody that I've been like working with. So we're doing that, and then I have a listing now for a little space on like an industrial space on Martin Luther King, and but it's I don't have some of the listings that I had before when I was doing a lot of multifamily, um, which I don't currently. I looked at a property, but it's not my listing. But when I was doing that more regularly, you basically that was kind of a national search, and people were looking for yield all across the country. And the yields in Louisiana were great in a lot of multifamily when you could borrow money at like 3,
Right.
4% because you're getting 7, 8, 12% on a property, and so the yields are really good compared to if you're looking at like South Florida, where you're borrowing money at like 3 or 4%, and your cap rate is like 4% on your property, or California, because the idea there is that the property would appreciate, whereas we didn't necessarily have the property appreciation here, but we had rentals that were working for
Right.
us. But now with the current environment and the cost of how much funds cost, like for those same properties, it's become more challenging, and I don't know that people want to take that risk as much.
So they had a lot of at one time they had a lot of money coming in from California, some of those locations here, but you don't see that too much anymore right now. Huh? Is that what you're saying?
I
Pretty
mean,
much.
I haven't like personally, but like I've
Yeah.
been doing a lot more of kind of the administrative and
Gotcha.
bureaucratic
Hmm.
side of things. Like when I had the multifamily listings for like a larger multifamily thing, people were literally calling me from all over the country and saying, "Yeah, I see you have this, but if you have anything that's like 150 units or more," and it's and honestly, there are some properties like that in New Orleans, but that's really not our market. There's some things out to the east, but like if I'm thinking of those things, like the Baton Rouge market is probably better for
Right. Right.
multifamily housing. In between the student housing and the apartment buildings and all those kinds of things, just more of that style of property. New
Mhm.
Orleans, much more built on that old model, like single family houses. It's not so much. We've seen some more of that in the downtown core with the South Market thing and more apartments being built, but there's not a whole lot of large scale multifamily, um,
Hmm.
like rentals like you would see a lot of other places. You just think of a place like Houston or something like that, where you just see miles and miles of multifamily things. And I guess like some mostly in New Orleans is in the outlying areas. I got some in Kenner, and
Right.
that kinds of things. And then, like I said, towards Baton Rouge.
They're finally getting the construction by the airport's finally starting to come around. They're
Right,
still working on it. It's gonna be another year, I think, but they're
right.
finally getting those little roads all put together.
Yeah, I mean, and like that's a prime example, right? Like it's a beautiful airport and it's well done, and
Right.
it's thought out, except the road to it. Like we don't.
Yeah.
We'll
It's
figure
always
that out after the fact. And the thing that kind of, and I've heard that they're using the old airport as a location now for filming, which is cool. But I remember thinking, like walking through there because they had just done a renovation of it of however many millions of dollars, just to
right.
close it in a new airport, like on the other side of the runway. And I didn't.
They just find ways to spend money. I'm trying to figure out how to just get in those little areas wherever they want to spend money. Just hey, let me just get a piece of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it, right? You got to be on the list or whatever.
They don't have a game plan. They just spend.
Whenever they send out the RFPs, and you just gotta like form your corporation and apply for it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate it. I think, times are changing right now. There's some things are just waiting it out. I think a lot of people are just waiting out the areas of what to invest into, where to invest into. So in your vision of eyes, I guess, when you look at Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and I think you and I talked about that, and I'm really starting to kind of get some contacts in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
You see that the Biloxi area, because I have a good friend of mine moved out there just the last few years, and it's incredible. Yeah. I went out there for just for a day or two, and it just felt good. People, like you're saying, just different atmosphere. Things are growing. I think Bay St. Louis is, from an Airbnb perspective, I think that's gotten a lot more competitive. I think Waveland, when it comes down to Gulf Shores and Orange Beach, I think a lot of things are flying about that way too.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just anecdotal, other than Baldwin County. So I'm also licensed out in Alabama, and where Orange Beach is in Baldwin County. So I have access to us there. But just in looking at that, like Baldwin County itself is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. And I think a lot of that is being driven by Mobile and the expansion of Mobile.
Right.
So it's going to be like, Walmart's secondary port, and then along the I-65 corridor, they're also planning to do all these like EV factories and battery manufacture, like a lot of stuff associated with that. And so I think that like Mobile itself has a lot of the same challenges, I want to say, as New Orleans does, as far as things go. And so it's like the other side, like the east side of the bay there, is kind of Baldwin County and all down there and the beaches. But that side seems to be doing well. I don't know about Mobile itself. I was talking to somebody who's investing there, because they're saying you can still kind of buy houses for like 15, 20,000 in Mobile and like rehab them and flip them for whatever, 80 or 100,000, that kind of thing.
15 to 20,000. Jeez.
Yeah, that's what they were saying. That was a while back, but yeah, they're buying things all day long, But that's what New Orleans used to be like, right?
Right. No, I remember. It was nice, but it was nice to back in those days. It's changed.
It's changed dramatically, yeah.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on tonight. We're just wrapping up now, but I think the opportunity just to have you on, I appreciate your information and just get to learn more about you. I know every time we get together, we get to learn a little bit more. I think next time I'm going to have you and Ed do a podcast, because he knew I was bringing you on tonight. I said, man, I wanted to be on that. So that might be one we might do.
That'd be cool.
We might do 3 of us and share stories.
Right. That'd be good. So, thank you, Renee. It was very nice.
Thank you. And so thank you very much, guys. Again, What's Your Passion podcast every Tuesday night between 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. Central. You can go to our YouTube channel, Renee Manfred News, and watch it on live. I appreciate your support. Every week, we're just looking for new guests like Mike and others to kind of bring value and information. So have a good night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.